As you can tell, we're going to be in 1 Timothy 4. We're just making our way through the chapter. So we're going to pick up where we left off, and that's in verse 10. So if you want to turn there, you can. Follow along, and of course, we'll try to have just questions. I hope you've been reading along. Not necessarily giving you any reading assignments for the week, so I'm hoping more than anything that you're just reading 1 Timothy several times so that you just maybe see things that you haven't seen before, and you pick up these themes and other things that Paul is trying to communicate to Timothy, and certainly how this applies to us and how it matters. Even though these are often letters that just don't seem to have much bearing, since they seem to be more of a personal nature. To Timothy, Titus can be included in that. Sometimes Philemon is sometimes viewed in that way. There's still a lot of great application, a lot of good meat that is embedded in this. So I hope that you've been benefited by this, and that your patience as we've gone through this has been rewarded and continues to be rewarded on that end. So let's read with verse 10, and we'll go down to the end of the chapter. For to this end we toil and we strive, because we have set our hope on the living God, who is the Savior of all people, especially of those who believe. Command and teach these things. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of the Scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by the prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things. Immerse yourself in them, so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by so doing you will save both yourself and your hearers. So this verse 10, kind of closes the book, if you will, closes the theme on godliness. That we have some residual things to discuss with it. But really, if you want to look at this from a kind of a miniature outline, if you look at verses 10 through 16 and what we just read, you got 7 things that are mentioned. You got 7 things that are mentioned. So it's the next set of 7. So verses 6 through 10, you got a set of 7. And then verses 10 through 16, you got a set of 7. So you got hope is mentioned. You've got this command and teach these things, all that we've discussed. And then you've got the mention of speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. So we're treating those as 7 individual. Hope is one topic. Command to teach these things is one issue or one topic, if you will. And then the example. And then he gives us a brief list of what they are. So that's what we're going to look at, hopefully tonight. If we get a little bit of time, hopefully we'll finish. If not, we'll take a little bit of time next week to look at it. But you've got 7. So Paul just likes his list. He likes his list of 7 as comparable to other things that he gives. So let's look at this, if you will. So verse 10. I know the English Standard Version has the word toil. How many of you got a version that says strive? Strive for this. So Tom, you've got that. Others, Alan, New King James, is that correct? Is that what you're reading? Your version? So, ESV. So you got toil, you got strive. You got this idea of labor. You got this idea with strive, if you have that. The idea for Paul is that you take an athlete, and the athlete is in the 4th quarter of the game. They played an entire game, tired, beat up, just really worn down. And Paul is using a word, the Spirit is using a word where that athlete, and those of you that have ever played sports, you've heard this, he digs deep so that he can finish what's in front of him. So if you take that perspective of godliness, why does godliness require toil and striving and digging deep, if you will? Even if you're running on fumes, you still dig deep for that last bit of energy to accomplish the task. Why does godliness require work and labor and toil? Okay, it's not a natural human tendency. We're not going to be bent towards that to a certain extent.
Our environment is against us.
The environment that you are. So if you're taking the athlete, football, basketball, whatever you would have today, baseball, if you will, there is an opponent. But you're on their home field. They've got a home field advantage. So everything is working against us in terms of the environment in developing godliness and then So, living that out. So the environment is against you. What else do you have? Distractions. Okay? So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of things that you have to work against and you got to work for. What else can you think of? Why does godliness require work? Why can't I just sit by? Why can't you just sit here tonight and become more godly in 30 minutes or so? Why does it require work, effort?
Well, it does require action because our adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion to devour us. So we have to be diligent and strive to, again, another word, strive, but to do His will.
Okay.
So we have to build and grow in our life with Him.
All right. So, Scott mentioned the environment, but embedded in that environment, you mentioned the adversary he is working against us. We can't just assume that I'm going to become more godly with each Sunday that comes and goes or Wednesday that comes and goes. Can't assume that I'm going to become just more godly because I open up the Bible and look, I read a passage today. I am now more godly than what I was yesterday. No, it's a lot of toil and work and labor in that.
We appreciate more of that for which we have toil or work. The example that I always think of is if you have purchased your own bicycle, when you stop the bicycle, you stop it, you get off of it, put the kickstand down, you set it up where it's going to be all right. If you didn't, if somebody bought it for you, you just hop off and let it go.
Okay.
We appreciate more of that which we've worked for and earned than we'd ever would those that have been given to us.
No, that's a good analogy to look at. You appreciate it. You'll take better care of it. You'll be more intentional with it because you realize the work behind it to achieve whatever it was. So in Bob using the analogy of if you work for a bicycle versus just being given that or anything else in that nature. You think of anything else and why this would apply in terms of working and laboring and toiling for godliness.
It's been fairly recently that we've looked closely at the Beatitudes. And if you look at what Christ had to say while He was there,
Right.
and some of it is just daunting as to what we need to do or what He would have us to do. And so, making ourselves that way, you got to strive. It just doesn't come naturally.
No, it doesn't come naturally. And then even when you do apply yourself, and you're applying yourself to the point of exhaustion, just because you're working and laboring and toiling, Paul tells Tmothy, who in turn is to tell the church, you got to dig even deeper. You can't just settle. You can't have been this and think I've kind of benchmarked myself and I'm good now. No, you got to continue to do that. You got to continue to apply. So all of these action words that we see, practice, later on, practice these things, immerse yourself in these things. This is where that striving and that toiling is going to be applied to that.
And momentum.
Okay.
When we're trying to run, walk, find our balance, we don't have that momentum to keep moving at the beginning. It builds up.
It does. There's a lot of momentum. So the bicycle thing, we're learning to ride a bike at home. You got to keep pedaling. If you don't keep pedaling, you not only stop, you fall over. So we're learning, that. And it's, you got to keep going. You got to keep doing that. And Timothy's in front of him. As you pursue godliness, there's not going to be a day where you don't pursue it. But you need to know your work's cut out for you. And you're going to have to work for that. The work, though, is going to be under the lordship of Christ. So He set you up. You're godly because you're in Him. But now you still got to continue to push forward to that from that perspective. So go ahead.
We would never take a job and expect the boss to let us sit around doing nothing and get paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we expect anything less from the
Sure.
creator of all it is?
Go ahead.
He's to set an example in study and being prepared in order to teach these people who may criticize his youth.
Yes. And they are. It's not that they probably will. They will do it. It's not a probably. How many of you got a little footnote that says in verse 10, it kind of has an add-on, suffer reproach? Do you see that on the bottom? Do you have a little footnote in your Bible? It's a phrase that suffer reproach. And the idea is that you toil, you strive, But Timothy, there's going to be a little bit of suffering attached to this. So before we go on any further, what do you think about that footnote that's right there? Why would suffer reproach be added to that in some text, original text? What would suffering reproach have to do with toil, strive? Melissa got it. If you didn't hear what Melissa said, that's what Paul went through. When Paul pursued godliness, and you see this in other letters, he will show, yes, I toiled, yes, I strived, yes, it was a lot of work, and sometimes the work was actually enduring the suffering that came along with it. So you mentioned the adversary, Tom. Who's the adversary that Timothy's got to deal with in Ephesus in 1 Timothy? Who has been there? False teachers. They're actively, so you got the adversary that's working. You've got these false teachers that would actively work against him. Is it possible that they would plant that seed against Timothy when he says, don't let anybody despise you for your youth, that these false teachers would go around, undermine Timothy because he is a young man? And when they undermine Timothy, sadly, a byproduct of that could be you're going to suffer. Pursue godliness anyway.
Hebrews 11:6 says he rewards those who seek him. Seek him doesn't mean just sitting there waiting for it to happen.
Right? It's active. It's not passive. I'm not just sitting here and absorbing. It's an active type of thing. So in light of all of that, why does it matter for Timothy on who and what he places his hope? So it's interesting in this verse of toil and striving, and in some versions perhaps suffering reproach. That's found in the first half of the verse. The second half of the verse is, but we place our hope, or we set our hope on the living God. Why does that matter?
Same reason it matters to me, to you, to any of us. If my hope is not set on Jesus, if it's set on, I depend on the support and the strength I get here. But if that's what keeps me coming back only, then somebody's going to let me down and then I'll turn away.
Okay. All right. So you're right. We look towards each other, the church family, for support, encouragement, all the things that are needed. But if my hope is placed solely on that, what's inevitably going to happen? I will be let down because it's just human beings. If Timothy is looking to place his hope on the fact that people will grow and mature, they will become more godly, they will, whatever the goals are, if that's his hope, he's going to come away disappointed. Because it's not going to happen more often than not. But it's contrast that. Your hope is in God, and then I'm looking for God to do these things among God's people, then that's a different story. Yes, ma'am.
I think it gets back to, as far as application to us, before you become a Christian, you count the cost.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be cost. And then Jesus in Luke talks about if anyone, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself. I mean, and Timothy is just, this to me just accentuates the whole idea that it's a daily pick up your cross and follow Christ.
Yep.
And Christ, not other people.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, just the whole idea of what Timothy's trying to impress is carrying on that mission.
Sure. Yeah. Denying self, taking up the cross, becoming more like Christ in every chance, in every opportunity. How else does this fit? What would be a temptation facing Timothy in all of this? You've just been told. Teach, preach. We'll see in just a minute, command. We'll see the imperative, be an example. We'll see all of these things where Timothy is just, a lot is being placed on his shoulders. What's the temptation? With that being placed on his shoulders, what's the temptation? Okay, could be sit down and give up. Somebody's whispering. He would be discouraged. And he would give up because he's discouraged, but why would he grow discouraged? Why would that be the temptation? Part of it is youth. And by the way, a young man, he's probably around my age or so. Mid-30s, late 30s is probably where he's looking at. So part of it would be youth and people undermining him. What else would make him discouraged, though? You're laboring, you're toiling, and I don't see the progress. I'm commanding, I'm teaching, I'm working, I'm laboring. At some point you got to see something, right? And I'm not seeing it. Instead of unity, we've got disharmony. Instead of, Scott and I were talking about this, instead of oneness, I see a group of people over here with greed as their agenda, or I've got a group over here with doing whatever. I've got a church that had 2 letters written to them. You would think we would be mature by now. What else would he grow discouraged with? What else is the temptation? Yes, ma'am.
So, people would probably discourage him because of his beliefs, because most people at that time worshipped other gods, and some people might not have reached Paul's worship by then, and people still would have been teasing him for his beliefs in God, since people back then really put all their hopes on like false gods, because there were so many false teachers and false prophets.
Great job and great answer, Ms. Laurel. You're right. So many people around them are believing the wrong things and believing the wrong gods. And Timothy could get discouraged because there's just not a lot of people. That's a great, great answer.
Would you be tempted to, I mean, after a while, you maybe get so beat down, it'd be easier to just try and please people. So then you end up compromising, because people like to be liked.
Yep. It would be. I think you'd have extremes. You would either have that, because these guys seem to be successful with whatever it is, whatever the measurement is, or I'm going to throw in the towel and I'm just going to walk away. The other temptation is, Paul's telling me to do this. The success and the overall health of the church is dependent on me. Think of all the imperatives that he said. I'm not saying that's right, but look how easy it would have been. The church is not healthy because I didn't teach enough, or do enough, or my example wasn't enough, or just go down the list. I'm not. It's easy to see yourself carrying this weight. The church's hope is on me. And Paul says, nope, it's not on you. It's not on anybody. It's not on elders. It's not on deacons. It's not that they don't play a role, but the hope of the church is not on any human being. It's not even on the preacher. It's not on the minister. It's not on anybody. It's on the living God. Now, Timothy's got to still assume his role. So, Justin, you're right. It would have been easy to compromise, because all these other guys are gotten where they are because they've compromised it. But those would be extremes. And I think that's a reminder for us, whether we're staring down the barrel of a society that's going further and further away, or we're looking at the church and we wonder our own things, we have our own questions internally. Well, the hope is on this, or if we just had that, or what if, man, I hope this. The hope is in God. And if we're going to continue to survive and continue to grow and mature and all of that, it isn't because we've got all our ducks in a row. That's not going to happen. It's because we have our hope set. Paul says we've placed it. We've placed it on the living God. And I know that seems to be elementary, but it's easy to forget. We can look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I need to do more. I'm not letting us off the hook. Paul's already said you got to toil, you got to strive. But don't fall prey to the temptation where hope is misplaced. Any questions? Comments? Sir?
He may have felt like he wanted to go and be with Paul and be able to lean on him.
That's true too. He's by himself, as far as we know, for the first time. Yeah. So that's another piece of discouragement that could happen. He's got an uphill battle in front of him. So that's the segue. So Gary, you mentioned a second ago his youth. And Paul says, don't let anybody despise you for your youth. So somebody define despise for me. What does that mean? Okay. Could be a deep hatred. Think less of. All right. Melissa. It could be a judge, especially judging wrongly for that, based on your youth. You're young, you don't know anything, so the judgment that you can't contribute. What else? Think against. Okay. Any context with that?
Different opinions can cause people to despise you or dislike you or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, different opinion, different viewpoint. Just in this case, this is going to be a different teaching than what they've had from the false teachers for a little while. Timothy's not going to make friends. He's not going to have a fan club. He isn't going to have an amen corner. But he's still got to go out there anyway. He's still got to deal with tough things. So don't let anybody despise you. So in all of this, whether it's thinking against, whether it's judging like Melissa said, whether it's looking down, why would other people do this? We're talking about in the church now, not outside. But in the church, why would others do this to Timothy?
If I can tear you down, I will better.
Okay, so in some cases it's just simply, if I can tear you down, I can propel myself up, can look better as you will be my stepping stones. Yes, ma'am.
There are sometimes those that are quick to judge instead of giving one time to explain.
Okay, so they would just be very quick and already have made up their mind about him and not give him an opportunity. Yes.
So sometimes, like, people who want to worship God might come to the church and, like, despise what the preachers say and, like, what Timothy had to share on it. And so that's why other people would do it to him, just because, well, after Ahab, most people in Israel were, like, worshiping gods, because, like, after Ahab, like, all of the kings of Israel started worshiping idols.
Yes, they did. He put them on a wrong trajectory, put them on a wrong path, but you're right, they would despise somebody who would take them away from that. Okay, could be jealousy.
He's an outsider.
He's an outsider. He's not there. If he's been there, he's come and gone. So he's leaving him here now. So they're jealous because Paul's invested, perhaps, things in him. What else can you think of? Why else would others do this?
What he's saying is convicting them, and they don't like it.
Okay.
It means they have to change.
Yeah, and that is one of the big things that you would find in this letter, whether it's the false teachers or the church itself or a little bit of both. Timothy is going to say some very hard things that a lot of people are not going to like. And almost Paul is saying, Timothy, don't let them personally undermine you. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Putting this with the admonition to keep reading Scripture in public, I wonder if they just felt his teaching was just not interesting anymore.
You could be.
With everything that's going on in Corinth,
Yeah.
we've already heard this. Let's hear something new.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's admonishing him to stick with
it. Mm-hmm.
We see it today. If you don't like the message, destroy the message.
That's right. And we're seeing it more and more. And what's interesting is that it's not new under the sun. We see this over and over. It's happening in the church. It's happening. I mean, Paul said that. Tom. Tom said. We call you Paul. Tom said that it's. Well, go ahead and repeat it. I'm still thinking you're Paul.
If you don't like the messenger, destroy
Yep.
the message. Or don't like the message, destroy the message.
You don't like the message, you destroy the message. You do a character attack, a character assassination, which we're seeing that happen outside of the church. It's happening more and more because truth just is not welcome. And so you mentioned this a second ago, Carol. The conviction that these are ouchies. He is stepping, it's going to come across where he's going to step on toes. And the truth is going to hurt. And this is to Justin's point, compromise, watering it down. There's a lot of things that Timothy would have. And part of that, if he went to that extreme, is that he let, perhaps, personal attacks get the best of him.
Christianity was quite different than either just non-Jews, Gentiles, or Jews, with what they had been practicing. So he was asking for quite a change. And if we look at Paul and how diligent he was, but think of the horsepower that he had. He had studied, he had knowledge, he had the age, that he was able to speak. And here's a relatively young man, pretty much alone, trying to promote this different kind of living. And as long as he's making progress, then he can be energized. But if it begins to stall, I think that's a contributor
Sure.
to it.
No, that's a great point. Paul had, by virtue of his own work, he had a lot of credentials. And he'd walk into a room and he would just command a room, as we would say, with someone. If people would just listen to him, because he's a Pharisee of the Pharisees, a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Timothy comes from a blended family, Jew and Greek. His mother, not a father, taught him all of this. He's no Paul. Young. What do you know? I mean, there's so many things that people would go. And you're right, what would happen is that he's almost facing a war on two fronts. He's probably getting attacked personally, or perhaps will. And then, what if he does meet initial success? And then I like what your word was, he stalls. And you're just kind of in a holding pattern. And there's just nothing. What do you do? You get a little desperate.
Begin to question
You can.
own behavior. Maybe not your belief, but your own behavior.
You can. And I was going to say the same thing, because that's another segue into what Paul is going to say about example. Your behavior comes in and it matters just as much as your teaching and your knowledge. So this word example means guidance or pattern for a certain style of life. And think of the pressure that Timothy is just told with that. You don't need to just know what you're saying. You actually got to live. Now, I know we kind of look at it and that's everybody. If you're going to stand up and lead, and you're going to have a vocal and a prominent position, then you've got to set an example. You've got to be a guide. Well, what does a 35-year-old know about a certain style of life that he's probably just learning himself now? What does a 38-year-old or 39-year-old or 40-year-old know about guiding older men and older women in a certain type of life, when they've probably seen more in their years than he has lived in terms of years? You start doubting yourself. You start struggling with that. If you want, when this word is used in other places, if you want to write it down, 1 Corinthians 10 in verse 6 is a good one, where Paul tells the church at Corinth that these things that happened to Israel served as an example of what not to do. And in Philippians 3 verse 17, Paul will use it in a positive sense. Here are these things that serves as an example of what to do. So don't follow Israel's path or pattern of life. In 1 Corinthians 10, follow me as I follow Christ. You've heard that before. Be that example, is what Paul would say with that. So, what are the 5 areas that Timothy is to be an example? It's not exhaustive. I think you can combine it in other places, but at least right now, what are the 5? Okay, how he speaks. So speech.
Conduct.
So conduct. So there's behavior. Conduct, you use interchangeably. Love. Okay, love. We've seen that already a couple of times in the letter. There are 2 others. Faith. All right. And then one more. Purity. And you would think that you would see hope, but you've already seen hope already. So Paul has his trinity of things: faith, hope, and love. You ought to do a study as a side note on just faith and hope and love outside of 1 Corinthians and where it shows up. So speech and conduct are your outward examples. People are going to hear it. People are going to see it. Faith, love, and purity are inward. So the question is, why these? Why not holiness? Why not, we've already talked about godliness, but why not mention it again? Why not hope? Faith, hope, and love. You would see that before. Why not any of the other things that we would see, like self-control or gentleness or kindness? Why these 5?
The things you just mentioned are part of conduct,
Okay.
so they are implied.
Okay. All right. So from a behavior standpoint, you would think that they're probably just inferred or implied underneath that conduct. You would be self-controlled in your conduct. You would be gentle or kind or what have you. Why else these 5? Think again. Think of the letter. Think of the context. Think of all that we've discussed. Why these 5? Okay, you got an example of servanthood, which we've already seen. In 4 verse 6, this is how you learn to be a good servant of Jesus.
Without the faith, love, and purity, the rest of it is just shallow.
All right. All right, so if you just stick with speech and conduct, it will only get you so far. It only does a little bit, but there's no depth to it without the inward part. It's just shallow, like you said.
One of the things that I just noticed as I hadn't thought in reading it, is that many of the things we could say that we should pursue might be nouns. Every one of these is a verb.
They are.
Every one requires activity. Good.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that ties into the godliness. What is godliness? You'd almost hear Tmothy. Okay, you tell me to strive for it. You tell me to labor after it. Well, what is it? Godly speech, godly conduct, godly faith, godly love, godly hope, if you will, godly purity. This is the meat to that bone that is godliness. What is it? This is what you're laboring. This is what you're striving for.
These are things that would be seen or experienced by the congregation.
Ah, okay. So there's no hiding it.
They're more external than internal.
Okay.
Except the faith part.
Well, even the faith part would come out eventually. Right? You'll walk by faith, if you will. It'll come out. Go ahead, Bob.
Speech and conduct are outward, it's things that people can see. But it's in my experience that without faith, love, and purity, they're not going to buy what you're selling.
Okay.
Because you don't have that foundation, that belief within you to bring these out and make them available to other people.
All right, so it gives a genuineness and an authenticity to what you're trying to say, to what you're trying to do. All right. What are the 5 ways in which you describe the false teachers that we've looked at so far? Deceitful, greedy, no love. In other words, Tmothy, in these 5 ways, these are not just a random list cobbled together. This is a strategic list to contrast. Here are these false teachers who are motivated. They speak, but they are not moved by love or faith or purity. Their words are not that. Their words are based or rooted in greed or selfishness or deceit. Their conduct is not rooted in faith, love, and purity. See, what the speech and the conduct is what they're rooted in. Are they love? Is it love or is it something else? Is it faith or is it something else? Is it purity or is it something else? And this is what we don't understand. Eventually, we always reveal who and what we're rooted in. At some point, I can only keep it hidden for so long. And either faith, love, and purity are what's happening and developing and growing on the inside, or something else. I can only put on a show for so long before it finally gets revealed. Tmothy, don't do that. Because if you do, you will be just like the other guys that are there. And that's not what God wants for you. And that's not what God wants for the church. Anything you'd add to that before we close out? Tom?
preachers or well-known
Sure.
gospel preachers get fame a little bit, or get well-known, or get a following per se, then the power seeks in and different things happen. And if you, like you said, if you immerse, Paul said, you immerse yourself in these things, it's hard to go that route because you're serving someone else besides yourself.
Sure, you are. And if you just kind of zoom out, and we'll close with this, if you zoom out in the current state of Christianity in this country, a lot of what's happened over the last 20 to 30 years is because some minister somewhere did something. And the sour taste that people have. And you just have to deal with it. And sadly, we're dealing with the repercussions, and I see this just in interactions with the world, and you got to work extra hard as a minister. Let no one despise you for your youth. I wonder what it would have been is that let no one despise you for the title of preacher. But you don't get a good response. Just when you're asked, what do you do for a living? And you tell I'm a minister. I mean, it happened earlier this week. It's just, everybody gets, tight-lipped. Now, for whatever reason it may be, but part of it is that I know that sadly the things that have happened within this country, whether they're in the same cloth or not, were viewed in the same way, is because ministers did things. Ungodly things. Terrible things. The power and the position, you mentioned power and position they had, was not faith, love, and purity. Now, we don't need to look and say they need to be perfect. I hope you don't look at it that way, because I don't need to stand up here anymore if that's the case. But I know, just give you a little bit of a window, I know what I'm up against just with the title of minister and preacher. Know that. But this is all of us, though, because Christianity is starting to get that way. Sadly, again, lumped everybody in. If there's something that I can impress on every single one of us for this week and every week following, be mindful of who you are around other people. Be mindful of the example to be set among each other and among other people. Because more people are turned off when we say one thing and we are completely different. And Doris, you had the best word, that it's a shallowness to that. Please be mindful of your own example this week. Please be mindful of the power of who you are and how God has chosen His church, faults and all, to reveal Himself. It's already hard enough. Don't put a basket over the light by not having the example that God would desire for us to have. So if I can beg of you, if I can beg of us, set an example, starting with the believers, in speech, conduct, faith, love, and purity. And let's help the cause of Christ and not hurt it, because we went the opposite direction. Forgive me for preaching. I had a little one in me. Can't help it. But I'm glad you're here. And I hope that we're thankful to the God in Christ who forgives us when our example is not where it should be and gives us another day. But be mindful of that as you go your way this week.